My dear friends, today I invite you to explore a gentle yet profound truth. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can say is nothing at all. We live in a world where noise is mistaken for importance, and attention is confused with validation. But in truth, our greatest healing often comes when we remove ourselves not in anger, but in wisdom. Removing yourself does not mean giving up. It means stepping back so you can return to yourself. It is saying, I choose peace over proving a point. When we choose silence, we are not being passive, we are choosing presence. Silence is not empty, it is full of guidance. It is full of clarity. It is full of healing energy that can only be accessed when the world is turned down and the heart is turned up. Imagine your energy as a precious garden. Would you let just anyone walk through it, stomp on your flowers and drain your soil? Of course not. And yet, we often do this energetically, giving our presence to arguments, dramas, and situations that do not deserve our light. In those moments, I encourage you, remove yourself completely, not out of bitterness, but out of love for your own well-being. Your silence is not your absence, it is your presence magnified. Let your silence communicate your self-respect. Let it say, I know who I am, I don't need to defend it. When you remove yourself, you begin to heal. You become the safe space that you once looked for in others. In that stillness, your intuition returns. Your clarity sharpens and your energy starts to rebuild. This is not avoidance, it is alignment. You are aligning with your worth. You are saying to the universe, I am ready for peace. I am ready to grow. I release what no longer serves me. And my dear, what you release clears space for what is meant for you. So remember, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to chase closure from those who never truly opened up. Let your energy speak, let your silence shine, because in that quiet you will hear the most important voice of all, your own. So let's begin with something that many people misunderstand, detachment. When I say remove yourself completely, I am not speaking of abandonment. I am not suggesting you run from discomfort or turn your back on people in cold indifference. No, I'm speaking of a sacred act of preservation, a choice to honor your energy when it is being pulled in directions that no longer serve your highest good. Detachment is not rejection. Detachment is not bitterness. Detachment is the conscious decision to pause, to step back, to observe without absorbing. We often confuse involvement with love, as though to care means to stay entangled. But staying in emotional chaos does not prove love. It only proves that we have not yet remembered our worth. True love toward ourselves and others sometimes looks like distance. It's choosing not to argue, not to control, not to plead for understanding, but instead to say, I will not sacrifice my peace to win your approval. This kind of detachment is powerful because it doesn't come from fear. It comes from clarity. It says, I see what's happening here, and I choose not to lose myself in it. Now, let's look at this psychologically. When we remain in environments that constantly activate our nervous system, where we are explaining ourselves, defending ourselves, or diminishing ourselves to maintain connection, what we're actually doing is repeating old emotional patterns. Many of us learned, consciously or unconsciously, that being needed equals being valued, that our presence must always be validated by others' comfort. But that is a survival strategy, not a soul strategy. It's rooted in fear, not in faith. To detach is to recognize when your emotional survival instincts are no longer needed. It is the moment when your inner self says, "This is not my lesson to carry, this is not my storm to calm." And when we hear that voice quiet but clear, we owe it to ourselves to listen. Philosophically speaking, detachment has long been a pillar of wisdom traditions across cultures. The Stoics called it apatheia, not meaning indifference, but a serenity that arises from inner mastery. In Buddhism, detachment is not about avoidance, it's about non-attachment to outcomes, allowing life to flow without clinging or resistance. Even in modern psychology, emotional detachment, when healthy, is seen as a boundary, not a barrier. So when we talk about removing ourselves completely, we are talking about stepping into this lineage of wisdom. We are saying, I trust life enough to let go of what disturbs my peace. I believe in my ability to choose my environment, my conversations, and my energy investments. When you remove yourself, you're not disappearing, you're becoming. You're no longer shrinking yourself to fit into distorted dynamics. You're no longer volunteering for emotional labor that goes unpaid. You are shifting from reaction to response. And that shift, subtle as it may seem, is transformative. It gives you back your power, because real power is quiet. It doesn't shout, it doesn't chase, it doesn't need permission. It simply stands rooted, clear, undisturbed. And that is the gift of detachment, the return of your own presence to yourself. So if you find yourself drained, unheard, disrespected, or misused, remember this: you don't need to stay to prove that you care. You don't need to explain why you're leaving a space that hurts. Your peace is reason enough. Walk away, not with anger, but with grace. Walk away knowing you are not losing anything. You are reclaiming everything. Let your absence become your boundary. Let your silence become your truth. And in doing so, remind the world that nothing speaks louder than a soul that chooses itself. Let's talk now about silence, not the kind that's awkward or empty, but the kind that is deeply alive, the kind that holds truth without words. We are taught to use our voice to express, to advocate, to prove. And while using your voice is powerful and necessary in many contexts, there is another kind of power that is equally transformative: choosing not to speak, choosing stillness over struggle, choosing presence over performance. There's a cultural narrative that says silence is weak, that if you don't defend yourself, if you don't respond, you're giving up. But that's a misunderstanding rooted in ego, not in wisdom. Because the truth is, silence, when chosen consciously, is not weakness. It is strength at its most refined. Silence is not submission, it is sovereignty. It's the moment you realize that your self-worth doesn't need to echo in someone else's ears to be real. When you remain silent, especially when provoked, you are not avoiding conflict, you are rising above it. You are declaring, without words, that you will not be pulled into a lower frequency of reaction, that you will not be baited into explaining who you are to someone determined not to understand you. And that kind of silence, my friends, is thunderous. It speaks volumes about your growth. It shows that your energy is no longer reactive, but responsive. That you are no longer performing to be seen. You are grounded enough to know that visibility does not equal value. In psychology, this concept aligns with emotional regulation and assertive non-engagement. Choosing silence is a form of boundary setting. It's a refusal to participate in dynamics that drain you, not because you have nothing to say, but because what you could say is no longer worth the cost of saying it. In fact, silence can often be more honest than words. Words can be manipulated, silence cannot. Silence reveals everything: your intention, your clarity, your inner peace. There's a kind of inner maturity that develops when you stop explaining yourself to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. When you realize that validation is not a spiritual need, it's a social craving you can outgrow. Let's look at it philosophically. In Taoism, there is the principle of Wu Wei, or effortless action, where true power flows from harmony with the moment, not resistance to it. Choosing silence is often an act of Wu Wei. You are not forcing a result. You are allowing truth to reveal itself, and it always does. Given time and space, the truth makes itself known. Your silence, when grounded in self-respect, often reveals more than any argument could. People may not always understand your silence, but you don't need them to. You are not here to be decoded. You are here to be whole. And so, when you find yourself in chaos, when the volume of the world rises, when egos clash, when your instinct is to defend, to retaliate, to explain, I invite you to pause. Breathe, withdraw your energy, and choose silence, not to disappear, but to recalibrate, to return to your inner alignment. Because silence is not an absence of power, it is the containment of it. It is the discipline to say, I do not owe everyone access to my inner world. And that's a boundary that speaks louder than any explanation. So here is your reflection. When words are no longer serving your growth, let your silence speak for you. Because the loudest truth is often the one that doesn't need to be said, let's go a little deeper now into healing. Because once you've stepped back, once you've chosen silence instead of struggle, something extraordinary begins to happen. The healing process starts to unfold almost naturally, but only if we let it. When we talk about removing ourselves, we often imagine it as a physical action, walking away, leaving a conversation, exiting a relationship or environment. And yes, that's part of it, but the deeper removal, the one that leads to actual healing, is internal. It's about pulling your energy back from people, patterns, and places that you've been overextending into for far too long. You see, healing doesn't happen in the noise. It doesn't happen while you're still entangled in what hurt you. Healing requires stillness, not avoidance, but space. It's in the space that the nervous system resets, that the emotional body stops bracing for impact, that the mind begins to see clearly what it couldn't see before because it was too busy surviving. From a psychological perspective, this is essential. Our brains are wired to protect us, not necessarily to heal us. That's why when you're caught in cycles of conflict or emotional confusion, your nervous system goes into overdrive. Cortisol rises, clarity disappears, and the body holds on to pain as if it's still in danger. But the moment you remove yourself from that stimulus physically, emotionally, energetically, your body gets the message it's safe to begin healing. And that's when something incredible happens. You begin to feel things you had numbed. You begin to question things you once tolerated. You begin to hear your own thoughts more clearly, without the interference of others' expectations or projections. This is not always comfortable. Healing rarely is at first. Silence can feel like emptiness, but that emptiness is sacred. It is the clearing of old noise to make space for new truth. It is the in-between moment when the wound is no longer bleeding, but the scar has not yet formed. Philosophically, we might say this is the threshold. It is the spiritual space between endings and beginnings. It's where transformation lives, and it cannot be rushed. The modern world values speed, but healing asks for slowness. for presence, for solitude. So many people want to heal while still staying connected to what broke them. They want growth without separation, but you cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. Just as a physical wound needs air and protection to close, an emotional wound needs distance and peace to process. When you remove yourself completely, not as a punishment, not as a performance, but as a commitment to your well-being, you give your inner world the conditions it needs to repair. And that's when true healing begins. Not the surface kind, not the temporary relief, but the kind of healing that rewrites your emotional patterns, that rebalances your energy, that reintroduces you to your own voice. This is what silence offers. Not just rest, but restoration. Not just peace, but power. So, if you're in a season where everything feels too loud, too demanding, too fast, consider this. Maybe you're not meant to push through. Maybe you're meant to pull back. Maybe the lesson isn't in doing more, but in allowing more space for what's already trying to rise within you. Let the silence hold you. Let it show you what your inner voice has been whispering all along. Because when you give yourself permission to step away, you're not walking away from your life. You're walking back toward yourself. And that is where all healing begins. Let's explore something subtle but deeply transformative. The energy behind words and the even more profound energy behind silence. Every word we speak carries a vibration. Louise Hay taught us this power, how our affirmations shape our beliefs, how our internal dialogue becomes the architecture of our lived reality. We don't just speak language, we embody it. Our cells listen, our energy responds. Words are not just sounds, they're frequencies. They carry intention, they manifest emotion, they shape perception, both for ourselves and for those around us. But just as words have power, so does silence, a deeper, quieter power, one that doesn't depend on sound but on presence. You see, there are moments when words become unnecessary, not because we have nothing to say, but because we have said all that can be said. There comes a time when speaking more only feeds the very energy we wish to release. When continuing the conversation doesn't clarify, it clutters. And that's when silence steps in as a higher choice. Silence, when rooted in awareness, becomes an energetic boundary. It's a vibration of self-trust. It says, I don't need to explain myself to be in my truth. I don't need to be understood to know my own clarity. That's powerful. That's aligned, and it's also deeply healing. Think about the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is immediate, emotional, often defensive. Responding takes space. It often begins in silence. A pause, a breath, a moment of reconnection. This pause is where wisdom lives. It's the space where words become intentional rather than impulsive. From a psychological perspective, this is emotional mastery. The ability to delay response is tied to higher emotional intelligence. It shows that you're not speaking just to release tension. You're choosing to communicate from centeredness or not at all. And that choice creates trust, first in yourself, then in others. Silence doesn't mean suppression. This is important. We're not talking about bottling up emotions or avoiding necessary conversations. We're talking about discernment, the awareness to know when speaking is useful and when it only adds weight to what you're trying to let go of. There are times when silence becomes the most compassionate option, not only toward others, but toward yourself. You conserve energy, you preserve dignity, you exit dynamics that thrive on conflict, and you return to stillness, where your energy can recalibrate. Philosophically, Silence has always been seen as sacred. In Eastern traditions, silence is a gateway to enlightenment, a way of listening to the divine within. In Western thought, thinkers like Pythagoras and Plato taught that silence is the beginning of wisdom, not because it contains answers, but because it quiets the noise long enough for truth to emerge. This is where silence and vibration intersect. Your silence can become a kind of affirmation, one that doesn't need words. It can say, I am at peace. I no longer resonate with this energy. I trust what life is unfolding. And others feel that. They may not understand it mentally, but energetically it speaks volumes. The shift in you becomes the message. Your detachment becomes your declaration. Your stillness becomes your strength. So let your silence be intentional. Let it rise from a place of clarity, not fear. Let it be a reminder that your energy, like your words, is sacred, and not everything is worthy of receiving it. Because in the end, silence isn't emptiness, it's alignment. It's the vibration of knowing that truth, once fully embodied, no longer needs to be spoken. And in that knowing, you become unshakable. So remember this, when your words would only dilute your truth, let your energy do the talking. Let your silence become your statement. Let's now turn our attention to something that often goes unnoticed, but influences everything, your energy. Because while we spend much of our time focused on what we say, how we act, and how we present ourselves, it's the invisible that often carries the greatest weight. And that invisible force is your energy. You've probably felt it before, walking into a room and sensing tension before anyone has spoken. Or meeting someone who instantly feels calming, safe, grounded, even if they say very little. That's energy. It speaks before you do. It carries messages that words cannot. It reveals your inner state, your alignment, your truth. We tend to think that people hear our words first, but in reality, they feel our presence. Long before you say, I'm fine, people pick up on whether you truly are. Long before you explain your intentions, they've already felt your frequency. Your energy is a language, and everyone is fluent in it, even if they're not consciously aware of it. This is why choosing silence can be so profound, because silence allows your energy to speak more clearly. When you're no longer using words to defend, persuade, or prove, your energy becomes the purest expression of who you are. It's no longer filtered through performance. It's just presence. When you're anchored in that kind of presence, you don't need to say much. You stop explaining your boundaries, they become felt. You stop justifying your decisions, they become understood. You stop trying to be seen because your energy makes you undeniable. From a psychological lens, this relates to self-regulation and embodied confidence. When you are grounded in yourself emotionally and energetically, people sense your boundaries without you having to announce them. You become less reactive because your sense of self is not being outsourced to other people's reactions. You're no longer looking to be validated. You are simply being, and this presence is magnetic. It doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't grasp. It allows, and in allowing, it attracts what is in true resonance with you. Philosophically, this ties into the concept of authenticity, not as something you construct, but something you uncover. When you remove the layers of performance, conditioning, and external expectations, what's left is your essential energy. And that essence speaks more clearly than any carefully crafted sentence ever could. Think of great spiritual teachers, wise elders, or people you've met who carry deep peace. They don't talk much, yet their presence shifts the room. Why? Because their energy is aligned. Their inner world and outer world are no longer in conflict. They don't need to convince anyone of who they are. Their silence says everything. This is what we are called to cultivate, a silent confidence, a still energy that speaks louder than noise ever could. And we cultivate it not by controlling how others see us, but by aligning with how we truly feel. When your energy is clean, calm, and intentional, it becomes your message. You stop trying to win arguments and start embodying truth. You stop reacting and start resonating. So ask yourself, what is my energy saying when I walk into a room? What am I broadcasting when I say nothing at all? If there's a misalignment, don't panic. That's just an invitation to step back, to get quiet, to return to yourself. Because the deeper your presence, the fewer your words, and the clearer your energy, the less you'll need to explain. In the end, you are not here to convince the world of your worth. You are here to become a living, breathing example of it. So let your energy speak. Let it whisper the truth of who you are, even when your mouth is closed. Because when your energy is aligned, silence becomes your most powerful voice. Now let's bring it all together with integration. Because healing isn't the end of the journey. Alignment isn't the destination. Once you've detached, embraced silence, allowed space for healing, and aligned your energy, there comes a point where you're asked to live from that space. Not occasionally, not just when it's convenient, but consistently. This is integration. The quiet, continuous commitment to becoming who you truly are, moment by moment, choice by choice. It's one thing to understand detachment in theory. It's another to practice it when someone triggers your old wounds. It's one thing to appreciate the power of silence. It's another to sit in that silence when you want so badly to be heard. Integration is what happens when these concepts are no longer just ideas. They become your way of being. And here's the truth, integration is not glamorous. It's not always noticeable to the outside world. It happens in the spaces no one sees when you choose not to reply to that message, when you walk away from an argument that once would have pulled you in, when you rest instead of perform, when you listen to your intuition rather than your insecurity. These are quiet revolutions. From a psychological perspective, this is where real transformation becomes sustainable. We can have powerful insights, emotional breakthroughs, and beautiful moments of clarity. But if we don't integrate them into our behavior, if we don't let those insights reshape our decisions, then they remain fleeting. What we're looking for is embodiment, not knowledge stored in the mind, but truth lived through the body. That takes practice, compassionate repetition, gentle discipline, and a willingness to begin again when you forget. Because you will forget, we all do, but the more often you return to your center, the stronger that center becomes. Philosophically, integration is alignment between inner and outer life. The ancient Greeks called this eudaimonia, a state of human flourishing that arises when our actions match our deeper values. In simpler terms, it means living in such a way that your soul feels at home in your own life. And to get there, we must keep asking, does this choice reflect who I really am now? Because you're not who you used to be, not after choosing to remove yourself, not after sitting with your silence, not after healing in solitude and reclaiming your energy. You've evolved, and now your life must evolve to reflect that. So you begin to speak differently, move differently, love differently, not because you're trying to be someone new, but because you've finally stopped trying to be someone you're not. Integration means you no longer abandon yourself for the comfort of others. You no longer override your intuition for the sake of peace that isn't real. You begin to trust the space you've created, and you begin to live from it. And yes, it may feel unfamiliar at first. The silence, the boundaries, the newfound clarity. You might even be tempted to go back to the noise, just because it's what you've known. But remember, familiarity is not the same as truth, and comfort is not the same as alignment. Your new path will ask more of you. It will ask you to be intentional. It will ask you to let go of what no longer fits, but it will also offer you something greater, peace that isn't dependent on anyone else's permission. Power that doesn't need to dominate, and clarity that can't be shaken. So let yourself grow into this new way of being. Don't rush it, don't force it, just return to it again and again with love, because integration is not perfection. It's devotion, and every time you choose yourself quietly, you are building a life that speaks louder than words ever could. And in the end, the deepest transformation is not what you say. It's how you live. Let your life become your voice. Let your presence become your legacy,